Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss the characteristics of the Romantic literature and in the history of English literature. Today we are going to discuss one of the most important shifts in the history of English literature, the rise of the Romantic movement. This movement did not appear suddenly, it developed as a strong reaction against earlier literary ideas, especially those of the new classical age. Now, in order to understand uh, romantic or age or romanticism properly, we must first understand what it reacted against. It was considered to be a reaction against the new classical school of thought. The new classical school of thought, which dominated the 18th century, focused heavily on reason, order, discipline, and strict rules. Literature during that time was highly controlled. Writers believed that poetry should follow fixed forms, classical models, and established conventions. Everything was expected to be balanced, polished, and logical. However, this strict rule bound approach gradually began to feel limiting. Many writers and thinkers started to think and feel that such literature was becoming lifeless. It did not reflect the full range of human experience. It ignored emotions, imagination, and the deeper inner life of human beings. As a result, the Romantic movement emerged as a reaction against the new classical school of thought. Moving on to the next feature or the characteristic or the quality or the property of the Romantic literature is, in fact, a reaction against the reason. Now, this reaction was not just against the literal rules, it was also a reaction against the dominance of reason itself. The 18th century is often called the age of reason because people believe that human progress depends mainly on logic, science, and rational thinking. But the Romantic poets, on the other hand, challenged this idea. They argued that human beings are not guided by reason alone. A person also feels, dreams, imagines, and experiences life emotionally. So, Romanticism can be understood as a reaction against reason, or more precisely, against the overemphasis on reason. The Romantics did not reject reason completely. It must be understood that they were not against the reason, but they refused to accept it as the only way of understanding life. They believed that truth can also be found through feeling and imagination. This brings us to the third feature of the Romantic literature, that is, in fact, it was one of the most important features of Romanticism, is the focus on imagination, feeling, and emotions. For Romantic poets, imagination was not just a fantasy or daydreaming. It was a powerful, uh, in fact, it was considered to be a powerful creative force. It allowed the poet to see deeper meanings in ordinary things. It helped transform simple experiences into something beautiful and meaningful. Similarly, emotions became central to poetry. Romantic poets believed that poetry should come from genuine human feelings. Instead of writing about artificial or formal subjects, they wrote about love, sorrow, joy, beauty, loneliness, memory, and personal uh, experiences. In fact, poetry in the Romantic age became more personal. Uh, you can say it became subjective and more expressive. In fact, the poet's own inner world, his thoughts, feelings, emotions, passions, and reflections and personal experiences became the main subject of poetry. Another important feature of the Romantic movement, or you can say another important aspect of the Romantic movement, is the attempt to understand uh, or adopt, in fact, I'm sorry, to adopt a new diction and meter. In the new classical period, poetic language was often artificial and highly polished. Writers used elevated and formal vocabulary, which was sometimes far removed from the everyday speech. Romantic poets strongly opposed this style. They believed that poetry should be written in simple and natural language, the kind of language that ordinary people use in day to day life. They wanted poetry to sound real, sincere, not artificial. In terms of meter as well, they experimented more freely. While they did not completely abandon traditional forms, they allowed themselves greater flexibility in terms of diction and meter and the choice of words, and in fact in the choice of subjects and themes as well. The aim was to make poetry more natural, more expressive, subjective, and full of feelings, and they wanted to bring it closer to the real human speech. This shift in diction and meter made romantic poetry more accessible and emotionally powerful. Now, another major idea in Romanticism is the concept of return to nature. Romantic poets had a deep love for nature, but for them, nature was not just a physical background or scenery. It was something living, meaningful, and even spiritual. They believed that nature has the power to heal the human mind. They believe that nature can calm emotions, inspire thought, and it can bring a person closer to truth in contrast to the busy artificial life of cities, uh, which was in fact the dominant and the most favorite setting in the new classical school of thought. Nature represented in the romantic poetry simplicity, purity, and authenticity. Romantic poets often turned away from the urban life and focused on the rural settings. Uh, Here it is very important to understand that the new classical school of thought, or the poetry of the new classical school of thought, is also known as a kind of drawing room or town kind of poetry. But the romantic poetry is considered to be a kind of rural poetry because the setting and themes are mostly taken from the lap of nature. They focus more on mountains, rivers, forests, and villages, and in fact, villagers as well. They saw nature as a teacher and, in fact, as a guide, and sometimes as a source of moral wisdom. This idea of returning to nature was also connected to a desire to return to simplicity because nature teaches simplicity. There is no dominance, or in fact, there is no bondage in nature. The Romantics believed that modern society had become too complicated and artificial. By going back to nature, a person could rediscover a more genuine and meaningful way of life. So, if we bring all these ideas together, we can clearly see that the Romantic movement represents a major transformation in literature. It is, in fact, a reaction against the strict rules of the classical age, a challenge to the dominance of reason, a celebration of imagination, emotions, and passions and feelings, a shift towards simple and natural language, and a deep appreciation of nature. In short, Romanticism brings literature closer to real human experience. It gives importance to the inner life of the individual and allows poetry to become more personal, emotional, and expressive. Uh, you can say in the conclusion that the Romantic movement marks a turning point in English literature. It replaces control with freedom, reason with feeling, and artificiality with natural expression. It reminds us that literature is not only about thinking, it is also about feeling, imagination, and experiencing life deeply. Thank you so much for paying attention to this lecture. I'm going to upload this on the YouTube channel, and I hope you watch it, you listen to the lecture, and I hope you make me aware of the questions through your comments. If you have any question, just put it there in the comments, and I'm going to answer all those questions in the physical classes. Thank you so much, dear students, for paying attention to this boring lecture or whatever you say. Thank you so much. Jazakallah.